In the shadow of towering pines, a quiet war is waged, a dog's fierce loyalty battles, ruthless poachers, a ranger's courage clashes with darkness, and a forgotten veteran faces his past in the wilderness. With every step, Scout's paws mark a path of hope, every breath brings life back to the broken, and every howl echoes a prayer for justice. But when the night is deepest, who will emerge as the true guardian of Wind River? Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move, you please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The early autumn wind swept through the valleys of Wind River National Park, rustling the golden aspens and whispering secrets to the high Wyoming peaks. Morning sunlight filtered through thin bands of mist, casting long shadows across the forest floor. A light chill hung in the air, not quite winter's bite, but enough to remind any newcomer that the mountains kept their own time. Emily Rivers stood at the edge of a dirt trail, her boots already dusted in red earth, her breath visible in the cool air. Emily was 29, with a tall, athletic build hardened by years of hiking and outdoor work. Her skin bore the tan of someone who lived under the sun, her chestnut brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore little makeup, preferred utility over aesthetics, and her eyes, sharp, stormy blue, held a mix of determination and something quieter, more fragile, a yearning to matter. Once a GIS analyst in Boston, Emily had traded cubicles and coffee runs for cliffs and conservation after her father, a lifelong park ranger, passed away from cancer. His field journal, full of sketched maps and poetic musings about listening to the earth breathe, had led her here. Wind River was vast, ancient, and not entirely tamed. It was a place where stories didn't end, they got rewritten by time, weather, and wildness. Emily's first assignment came with a partner, a dog named Scout. Scout was a 6-year-old golden retriever, large and muscular, with a thick sun-gilded coat and kind amber eyes that blinked slowly, thoughtfully, almost human. But Scout's past wasn't as gentle as his expression. 2 years ago, he'd been found in the ruins of a fire-ravaged forest in Northern California, barely alive, his front leg burned, his lungs coated in ash. He'd been a service dog in training, then assigned to a firefighter who didn't survive. After months of rehab and retraining, he had been placed into the park's new wildlife recovery and search unit. Emily was his first real handler. Their bond was new, but growing, rooted in unspoken pain and quiet resilience. That morning, they were on a routine patrol mapping the western corridors of the park where human activity was rare and wildlife sightings plentiful. The path curved past spruce thickets and open meadows dotted with late-blooming asters. Scout moved ahead, nose low tail, swaying in measured rhythm. Emily had been walking in silence for nearly 2 hours, enjoying the rhythm of boots on dirt, when Scout suddenly stopped. His ears pricked forward. "What is it, boy?" she asked softly. He didn't bark. Scout almost never did, but his posture shifted. Alert, focused, his nose twitched toward a cluster of flattened grass near a dry creek bed. Emily approached and crouched beside him. Embedded in the mud was something wrong. A broken snare, its wire rusted but not old. Nearby she saw prints, hoof-shaped, wide, heavy. Not elk, not deer. She took out her camera and snapped a few photos. "This doesn't belong here," she whispered. The reintroduction of the southern white rhino to Wind River had been one of the most ambitious conservation efforts in the country. It had taken years of permits, planning, and community meetings. Only 5 rhinos were currently being monitored via satellite tag, all female, all vulnerable. But this print, it was fresh. As Emily documented the scene, another presence stirred deeper in the forest, unseen by her but equally observant. Brady Cole was kneeling beside a pine tree half a mile away, watching a trail of unusual footprints through his old monocular. At 41, Brady was the kind of man people didn't notice anymore, not because he blended in, but because he wanted it that way. Tall, lean with sunburnt skin and a weathered face that looked like it had been carved by wind and memory, Brady had lived alone in the woods for almost 8 years. His gray-green eyes had a haunted quietness, a man who'd fought too many wars both abroad and within. He rarely came down into town. Locals called him the vet in the trees. They weren't wrong. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and an IED that had taken half his hearing and left his knee permanently damaged, Brady had retreated into silence. His only companions were a pair of binoculars, a worn field journal, and an old photograph of a younger self beside a golden dog whose name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Now, crouched in the underbrush, he noted something that set his instincts on edge: unusual tire marks. Not ranger trucks. Too narrow, too deep. Something was moving in these woods that didn't belong here. Back on the trail, Emily ran her fingers along the torn grass and whispered to Scout, "Let's keep this quiet for now. We'll report it after we loop around." Scout responded with a soft, chuffed tail brushing against her leg. They continued deeper into the forest, both alert, both unaware that a parallel path was unfolding, one that would soon cross their own, and not by accident. As the sun reached its peak and the light grew harsh through the thinning trees, Emily glanced back once more at the disturbed soil behind her. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't quite name it. And somewhere, far beyond the noise of humans, a memory stirred in the mind of a dog who had once laid his head on the lap of a broken soldier, and now walked beside a woman chasing echoes of purpose. The sun had passed its zenith, casting long streaks of amber light through the thinning trees of Wind River. Emily Rivers stood at the edge of a low ravine. Eyes narrowed as she examined her map, the pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. The wind had shifted. What had begun as a still afternoon now whispered of something coming, not a storm, but a warning. Scout, the golden-furred retriever at her side, sniffed the air with increasing agitation. His tail was stiff, head tilted slightly as he pivoted eastward toward a narrow animal trail. For most of the morning he'd been calm, methodical, but ever since the 2 sharp cracks of gunfire echoed through the valley earlier, something had shifted in him. Emily knelt beside him, brushing her gloved fingers along his scruff. "It's okay, boy. We're gonna find out what's going on." The report had come through the Ranger Band radio just after noon, unconfirmed sounds of a firearm discharge near Sector D, deep in the conservation zone, where no civilian should be. That region was restricted a rewilding zone for large mammals, including the small population of recently reintroduced rhinos. Emily had volunteered to check it out, thinking it was probably just backfire from a rusted engine. But now, standing in this dense, unfamiliar patch of forest, she wasn't so sure. They followed the trail, Emily marking coordinates on her notepad. Scout suddenly veered left, nose low. The air grew denser as the trees closed in. Emily slowed. The terrain here was uneven, small gullies, fallen trunks, and patches of bramble that caught her sleeves. Her boots crunched softly on leaf litter. Then she saw it. Parked just off the tree line, partially hidden under a canvas tarp, was a dull gray truck with no plates. Emily froze. Her heart picked up pace. She reached for her phone, no signal. Slowly, she raised her camera and zoomed in on the rear of the vehicle. Faint scuff marks a partial serial number on the bumper, and something else rope coils and a blood-streaked plank in the truck bed. She snapped 2 quick photos, but as she moved to adjust her footing for a better angle, her boot slipped on damp moss. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. From behind the truck, 2 men stepped into view. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a camouflage jacket and jeans streaked with mud. His beard was grizzled, and his left eye had a slight droop, as if it had been hit one too many times. The other was younger, wiry, in a green hoodie, with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a snake tattoo coiled around his right forearm. Neither of them spoke as they looked directly at her. Emily tried to back away slowly, hands raised. "I'm with the Park Service," she said calmly. "This area is under federal protection. I'm going to ask you to—" That was as far as she got before the older man moved fast, shockingly fast, a blur of movement. The last thing she saw before the sky spun was Scout lunging forward, teeth bared, and then a sudden blow to her ribs that knocked the breath out of her. When she came to, her wrists were bound rough nylon chafing her skin. Her back was pressed against a tree trunk, thick gnarled pine bark scraping through her jacket. The forest around her was quiet, too quiet. Scout was gone. A mile away, Brady Cole knelt beside a small pile of spent rifle casings half buried near a weather-beaten cabin he hadn't visited in years. The place had once served as a forward observation post during his time with the Wildlife Defense Corps, a short-lived initiative to protect endangered species in war-torn zones. He touched the bullet casing, gently rolling it between calloused fingers. Something about the burn pattern looked recent. Then his eyes moved to something more chilling, a length of metal snare wire tangled among the roots of a nearby bush. Fresh blood had dried on the cable. Not much. Enough to mark a struggle. Brady's instincts, dulled but not lost, sparked to life. Someone's hunting in these woods. He moved carefully back toward his camp to retrieve his gear, his knee aching with every step. It had been years since he'd tracked anything besides elk or the occasional lost hiker. But this was different. He passed a small stone outcropping where a torn piece of forest green fabric fluttered from a bush. He stopped cold. It was park ranger uniform fabric. The stitching bore a partial name tag, Reeve, Emily Rivers. He muttered, his throat tightening. The name rang familiar from the ranger bulletin board at the post office in Dubois. He'd seen her photo once stapled beside a call for volunteers. His hand dropped to the side pocket of his pack, brushing against a folded photo. Scout. The dog in that picture, golden fur, eyes full of quiet wisdom. The same dog that once kept him alive after a mortar attack in Helmand Province. The dog who'd vanished during a medical evacuation and was presumed dead. Could it be? Could that dog now belong to this woman? Brady adjusted his pack and started down the ridge, following faint scuff marks in the dirt. The sun was sliding lower. Time was running out. Scout was running. His chest-burned paws raw from bramble and gravel, but he didn't stop. After the blow knocked Emily unconscious, he had feigned retreat, loping into the trees. But now his nose was down, weaving between ferns and rotting logs. He knew her scent, jasmine leather graphite pencil, and it hadn't disappeared. Scout stopped suddenly at a fork in the trail. His nose lifted to the air, a shift in wind. Then he heard it, a muffled cry, then silence. His ears flattened. With a guttural growl, he turned sharply and bounded toward the sound, leaving behind the trails, the rules, the years of training. Somewhere deep in his memory, another voice echoed a man's voice. Calm, broken. "You saved me, kid. You saved me. Scout didn't know he was heading toward Brady. He didn't know this was the beginning of a reunion long overdue, but he ran anyway, toward the one human he'd come to trust, toward the woman tied to a tree beneath a bruised Wyoming sky. The forest at dusk was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Scout moved through it like a ghost of gold and firelight, his coat glinting beneath the slivers of remaining sun. His pace was uneven, part instinct, part confusion. He had followed Emily's scent as far as the wind allowed, but now, with the breeze shifting and the night creeping in, he had lost it. He paused in a clearing surrounded by red pines, ears twitching. His breath came fast, his paws dusty and scraped from miles of silent pursuit. For a moment, the world felt too wide, but then he caught something faint metallic buried beneath the smell of pine needles and decay. Blood. Scout's nose brushed against the bark of a towering pine tree. The scent was weak, but it was Emily's. His tail stilled. He raised his head slowly, and his eyes caught something etched into the tree, a long, narrow scar down the trunk where lightning had once split the wood. But Scout remembered it differently. This was the tree where soldiers had trained the edge of the old military zone. He'd been younger, then quicker, full of obedience and purpose. He stood motionless beside the tree, then let out a sound low, raw, almost feline in its intensity. A growl turned into a bark turned into a full-throated roar that shattered the silence of the forest like a warning bell. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a squirrel dropped its meal. A buck raised its head in alarm, and a man, half asleep in an old hunting shelter, opened his eyes. Brady Cole sat upright on the edge of his cot, the crackling firelight painting jagged shadows across the wooden walls of his cabin. He had heard it. One bark, one voice from the past. He reached for the old rifle that leaned against the door and stepped out into the cold. Scout was already moving. He broke into a sprint pause, hammering the dirt. He retraced old paths, memories rising from each tree he passed. Then he smelled it again, sweat rope, fiber, blood, and fear. Emily. He reached the edge of a gully and saw her slumped against the base of a tree, wrists bound, head bowed. Her chest moved but weakly. Scout growled again, louder this time. He took one cautious step into the clearing. Two figures were there, dim shapes barely visible through the brush. One leaned against a tree, the other crouched beside a fallen log. Both froze at the sound. Scout didn't wait. He lunged forward, muscles bunched, jaws wide, and crashed into the rope holding Emily. His teeth tore through nylon thrashing with desperate force. One man shouted, cursing, but didn't move closer. The other took a step back. Scout barked sharp and furious. His body blocked Emily's limp form, and his eyes were blazing. And then a shot rang out. Not aimed, but loud. A warning. The two men scrambled into the trees without looking back. Brady Cole emerged from the brush rifle raised to the air. His breath steamed in the cold, his gaze steady. He stepped closer, and Scout turned. The dog stared at him, then blinked once, twice. Brady lowered his rifle. "Scout," he said. The dog didn't move. Not at first. Then he stepped aside, letting Brady reach Emily. Brady knelt down, fingers trembling as he cut the rest of the rope. "You found her," he whispered. Scout sat beside them, tail sweeping slowly across the leaves. In the hush of the woods, in the throb of returning breath, there was no need for words, only memory and recognition. The night wind howled gently through the treetops as Brady carried Emily down the slope toward his truck. Her weight was slight against his side, her boots dragging occasionally through the pine needles and damp soil. Scout trotted beside them like a shadow, silent, alert, and never more than a few feet from Emily's side. Every so often, he nudged her hand gently with his nose, as if reminding her he was still there. Brady's truck was a battered Ford F-250, decades old, paint faded, and the bumper hanging slightly loose. He helped Emily into the passenger seat, wrapping a thick wool blanket around her. Scout jumped in after her, curling up in the footwell, his eyes never leaving her face. They drove in silence. The road was narrow and gravel-lined, winding like a snake down the mountain. The headlights carved soft tunnels through the dark, and the world outside was swallowed by forest and night. Emily sat hunched beneath the blanket, her face pale and streaked with dried blood and sweat. Her hands trembled in her lap, though she said nothing. When they reached the ranger substation, Brady killed the engine and turned to her. "You okay to walk?" he asked. She nodded stiffly. "Yeah, just slow." Inside, the small wooden station smelled faintly of coffee and pine cleaner. Brady flicked on the lights. The place was modest, 2 cots, a supply shelf, a desk cluttered with trail maps, and a crackling radio that sat dormant beside a solar battery pack. Scout jumped up onto one of the cots and lay still, tail flicking once. Emily sat across from him and removed the blanket, wincing as she stretched. Brady handed her a bottle of water. Small sips. "Thanks," she murmured. After a few minutes, her voice returned. They were organized, she said. Calm, like this wasn't their first time. Brady nodded. It wasn't. Emily turned to him, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "You knew I suspected," he said. "I've seen the signs for weeks. Tracks too clean. Snares placed with surgical precision. Not amateurs." Scout let out a low, contented breath and shifted slightly. Emily looked at him, then back to Brady. He saved me. Tore through the rope like he knew what it meant. Brady's expression softened. "He's done it before." Emily frowned. Before Brady leaned back in the wooden chair beside the stove. He looked older in the flickering light, not tired but weathered like the mountain itself. He exhaled through his nose. His name used to be Tango. Military designation K9 TNG-4. We served together. Afghanistan, 2012. There was an ambush, mortar fire. I got hit. My unit was scattered. Tango stayed with me. Laid across my chest in the dust while the insurgents circled. Didn't move for hours. Emily watched him quietly. We were extracted 3 days later. I thought he'd died in the blast. They told me he didn't make it. Brady swallowed hard. Turns out he ran. And somehow, he lived. Scout blinked slowly as if recognizing the story. He rested his head on Emily's lap. Emily reached down and stroked behind his ear. "He's with me now," she said softly. Brady smiled faintly. "Looks like fate's got a sense of humor." The next morning, pale dawn light crept across the valley. Emily, now steadier, helped Brady unpack a case from his truck, an old Army field case dented and wrapped in canvas. Inside were notebooks, black and white photographs, and a sealed flash drive. "I kept these," Brady said, "from the last deployment. Intel logs, supply movement records, and names I was told not to remember." Emily stared at the flash drive. "These people, you think they're connected to the poachers? I know they are." Brady said, "Back then it was rare hides, leopard skins, elephant ivory smuggled through wounded towns. But this, what they're doing here is cleaner, louder, more organized." Emily nodded. "Then let's burn it down." She picked up the radio, thumbed the button, and made a call to Ranger headquarters. A crackling voice answered a woman's voice, steady older. "HQ, this is Rivers. I've just returned from Sector D with confirmed visual on a poaching transport vehicle and 2 armed suspects. requesting full team mobilization for sweep and containment. GPS coordinates to follow. The voice responded after a pause. Copy that, Ranger Rivers. We'll dispatch 4 units. ETA 90 minutes. Brady looked at Emily with something close to pride. He hadn't felt that in years. Later that day, they drove down to the sheriff's department in Dubois, a small brick building with a faded sign and a line of dusty pickups outside. Brady hadn't been here in over a decade. The receptionist, a round-shouldered woman in her 60s named Carol, blinked at him in surprise. "Brady Cole," she said, standing up slowly. "I'll be damned. Got something for the sheriff," he said. She took the flash drive and the notebooks, her hands suddenly shaking as she saw the military seals. "We'll keep this locked up." Emily gave her statement, while Scout lay at her feet, drawing quiet admiration from every deputy who passed. One officer, Deputy Marcus Keller, a lanky young man with a Texas drawl and too tight uniform, offered Scout a piece of jerky and scratched his chin with reverence. "This guy yours?" Marcus asked. Emily looked down and gave a small smile. "He's with me." That night, as the sun dipped behind the Wind River peaks, Brady stood alone outside his cabin watching Scout and Emily walk the perimeter trail. She was moving more easily now, and Scout stayed at her side like a sentinel, calm, grounded, sure. Brady took a breath of cold mountain air and looked up at the stars. Maybe, just maybe he thought there was still a place for him in all of this. Maybe life wasn't something that had ended in the desert, but something waiting to be rejoined, one step, one scar, one familiar bark at a time. The sky over Wind River was a deep navy pierced by stars and the quiet breath of wind slipping through pine. A convoy of park rangers and deputies moved silently beneath that night boots, pressing into damp earth radios on whisper rifles, shouldered but not raised. At the front of it all, weaving ahead like a thread of purpose, was Scout. The golden retriever's coat caught flecks of moonlight with every step, his gait steady and nose to the ground. At 6 years old, he no longer moved with the reckless energy of a pup, but with deliberate, confident grace. His tail was stiff, his eyes locked on the invisible trail, a pattern of broken twigs, crushed moss, and scent too subtle for humans to register. Emily Rivers kept a few paces behind him. The bruises on her wrists were fading, but the memory of the tree, the rope, the helplessness, they still lingered in her every breath. She wore a dark ranger jacket over a thermal base layer, her short brown hair tucked beneath a knit cap. Her hand rested instinctively on Scout's back each time he paused. Each time he pressed forward again as if to say, "Trust me." Brady Cole moved on her right flank. His posture relaxed, but eyes ever scanning. He wore no uniform, just an olive canvas coat, worn jeans, and the same boots he'd worn in Afghanistan. A different kind of war now, but one that still demanded clarity and courage. Hanging from his belt was the same military-issued radio that once saved his life, now reprogrammed to tap into Ranger frequencies. The mountains had drawn him back. Scout had given him a reason to stay. The group behind them was led by Sergeant Dana Holloway. She'd run joint operations across 3 states, but there was a tightness in her jaw tonight, the weight of what they were about to do. Her team had spent weeks tracking this poaching ring, but it was Scout who had uncovered the most direct path. They approached a bend in the valley floor where the pine thinned and the land dipped into shadow. Ahead, on a logging road long since overgrown, sat a white truck. Its back doors were open and makeshift ramps extended to the ground. 3 men moved around it, flashlights bobbing in nervous circles. One gripped a tranquilizer rifle. Another held a length of rope. The third stood by the cab talking on a satellite phone voice low and clipped. and between them all was a young southern white rhino calf, trembling, confused, a rope biting into its leg. Scout stopped. A low growl built in his chest. Emily dropped to one knee, raised her binoculars, and took a long breath. Visual confirmed. 3 suspects. Animal in distress. Ready for engagement. Dana's voice crackled over the earpiece. Team 2 encircle west. Team 3 stay low and prep for intercept. On my count. The countdown came in heartbeats. 3, 2, 1. Go. Lights flashed on. Hands in the air. Drop your weapons. Move away from the animal. The man with the rifle whipped around in panic, and Scout lunged a blur of golden muscle and fury. The man fell hard, the rifle spinning into the dirt. The others bolted in different directions but didn't get far. Rangers tackled one against a tree. The third tripped over the ramp and went sprawling into the underbrush. Emily sprinted to the rhino, her breath ragged. The calf flinched as she approached its side, heaving. "You're okay now," she murmured, cutting the rope with a ranger's knife. "You're safe." Behind her, Scout returned to her side, panting heavily. She turned, tears welling up as she dropped to her knees and hugged him tightly. Her voice broke. "You brought us here. You found her." Scout didn't move. He simply stayed there, steady, silent, warm, the same as he had that night in the woods, the same as he had in a foreign desert beside a bleeding soldier. The aftermath unfolded quickly. The poachers were arrested and loaded into armored transports. The rhino calf, gently sedated, was transferred onto a padded truck for emergency care. Dr. Lenora James, the field vet, a tall woman in her 50s with a sun-worn face and deep-set gray eyes, supervised the process with calm precision. She had once operated on lions in Namibia and spoke to animals in low, reassuring tones that seemed to slow their heartbeat. "This one's gonna be okay," she said, patting the calf's flank. "Scared, but not broken." Back at the ranger substation the next morning, the mood was subdued but warm. Scout lay in the middle of the common room, half dozing on a woven mat someone had donated years ago. Emily sat on the steps outside with a mug of tea, staring at the sunrise bleeding across the distant ridge. Brady joined her a moment later, leaning on the railing beside her. "You did good. So did you." They watched the sky for a while. "You really going to stay on as a consultant?" she asked. He shrugged. "They offered. I figured I'd say yes, long as I can still sleep in my own cabin." Emily smiled. "Good. We need you." Brady nodded, then looked inside where Scout still rested. "They've started calling him something new," he said. "Yeah, Echo." Emily looked at him. "Because he comes back," Brady smiled faintly. "Because he brings people back, to who they used to be, to what matters." Inside, Dana Holloway entered the room. She knelt beside Scout and ruffled his ears. Wind River's got its own legend. Now she said to no one in particular. From that day forward, stories began to spread of the dog that led rangers through fog and fire, who found the lost, who remembered what others forgot. He didn't wear a badge, didn't need a name tag, just a presence and a purpose. He was Echo. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or light. Sometimes they arrive on 4 legs wrapped in golden fur, with eyes that remember more than words ever could. Scout, now called Echo, wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that faith, loyalty, and love never go unheard. Like a prayer whispered into the wilderness, they return to us in the moment we need them most. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps it was the training. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was the hand of God working quietly through the bond between a wounded soldier, a lost ranger, and a dog who never stopped believing. In our daily lives, we often lose sight of what truly matters. connection, purpose, compassion. But this story calls us back. It reminds us that no matter how lost we feel, there's always a path home. And sometimes it's marked by paw prints. If this story moved your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Comment below with your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more true stories that inspire faith and courage. And if you believe in the quiet miracles God sends us through people, animals, and moments that defy logic, type Amen in the comments as a blessing for all who still wait for a sign of grace. May God bless you and guide you, just as Echo guided them.